Well, hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region. My name is Brandon, and welcome to this Free State Colorado interview. The mission of Free State Colorado is to promote a culture of liberty, freedom of the individual, and a free market. Today, I'm joined by Erin Lee, a mom on a mission. After her daughter was harmed by gender ideology in a Colorado public school, Erin set out to educate others, set precedent, help other parents, and shift our culture away from dangerous gender ideology being perpetuated by adults onto our kids. Her website is stopgenderideology.com, and her new documentary can be found at artclubmovie.com. Well, Erin, I hope you are well, and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Erin, what do parents need to know about government schools?
Well, as I've learned the hard way, they're not safe. I mean, ultimately, what it boils down to for me is that there's a lot of secrecy that is happening. There's a lot of curriculum that is questionable for a lot of parents. There's, the mental health counselors that are in schools that are perpetuating secrecy and medication and counseling without parental knowledge. And really, what I've learned is that critical theory and gender ideology have permeated every area of the curriculum, and oftentimes it's really subtle and undetectable. So, my primary advice, we'll get right off the bat with my number one piece of advice is I don't believe government schools in the state of Colorado are safe for our kids anymore. We've got to take them back.
Wow. Yeah, that's a very compelling message. And it seems like every day there's a new article that comes out, some story, whether it's, down in Jefferson County or Douglas schools or even in northern Colorado, where something's going on where kids are getting, getting manipulated by teachers or potentially, staff, told to lie to their parents and put in dangerous situations.
Yeah. I would definitely say, Jeffco, Cherry Creek, Denver Public Schools are hotbeds for this kind of activity. But where I am here in northern Colorado, Fort Collins area, Poudre School District, Thompson School District, even Weld County is seemingly a hotbed for this kind of thing, this kind of secrecy and usurping of parental rights and, indoctrinating our kids instead of educating them.
Wow. Well, Erin, your family's story has gained national attention. And with your new film, parents are seeing a side of schools that might surprise them. So, for those who aren't familiar with you, can you briefly share your story?
Yeah. So, prior to May of 2021, I was a very apolitical, not super involved parent. I was, sending my kids off to public school, blindly trusting that they were being taken care of at school like I take care of them at home, in loco parentis, that the school was taking good care of my kids. And so one day, my daughter, we had just moved to Wellington, Colorado. She had just turned 12. It's the height of COVID protocol. She's in a new town, in a new school, and she's a shy, introverted, artistic kid. And one day, her art teacher asked her to stay after school for art club that same day. And she did text us for art club. We gave our permission. When she got there, it was actually Gender and Sexuality Awareness Club, or GSA. And the art teacher had invited in an outside activist. This woman runs organizations in our community called Skittles for kids 5 to 11 to talk about gender and sex, and Splash for kids 12 and up. She started with her number one rule: what you hear in here, keep in here. And she used flags to describe umbrella terms about LGBTQ, telling the kids that if they're not sure who they're sexually attracted to, then they are queer. Queer is a term everyone can use while they're still figuring their sexuality out. She told them that transgender is when you don't completely feel like you align with your biological sex. So if there's any discomfort in your sex, then you may be transgender. And of course, my daughter identified with that. She was a barely 12-year-old girl who was going through all kinds of things that had played into her emotional state. And of course she's uncomfortable. All 12-year-old girls, all 37-year-old women are not fully comfortable in their biological sex and in their body at all times. And so she adopted that label. She was given flags and stickers and bracelets. This activist talked with them about puberty blockers, polyamory, suicide, telling the kids that these labels made them more likely to kill themselves. She said parents might not be safe. You don't have to tell your parents about this meeting or future meetings that she holds in the community. She asked them to connect with her privately on Discord and WhatsApp. She gave a cell phone number to the children. And my daughter actually expressed that she wanted to go home and tell her parents. And as she was leaving the room that day, her art teacher, her public school sixth grade teacher, pulled her aside and said, "You don't have to tell your parents." So they doubled down on the secrecy, at keeping everything that had happened to her a secret. And so we're really lucky that she came home and told us what happened. She proclaimed transgenderism to her dad and I both that night. It was really clear that in that short, 90-minute meeting, they had completely confused her and convinced her that her normal adolescent discomfort in her pubescent body means she's transgender. And she went full steam ahead with that label.
I mean, that is absolutely shocking. I can't even imagine, what it would be like as a parent to have to have that happen where, secret clubs, secret meetings, keeping information from parents, giving these kids all of these different ideas and telling them they might be one way or another without, I mean, it's just it's so irresponsible, it sounds like. And it sounds like it could cause real harm for sure.
It was almost unbelievable. I mean, here we are 2.5 years later, and I still sometimes pinch myself like this really happened. And then the school district really doubled down on what they had done because we, followed all the proper channels. At first we were, totally caught off guard and ill-equipped to help her in that moment. And that was intentional. It was intentionally a confidential meeting. They don't tell parents, they don't take attendance. We followed all the channels. We called the principal, who confirmed it was a confidential meeting, that they always meet privately, that children have, their own rights to attend these gender and sex clubs without parents knowing about it. We contacted the school board, who ignored me at first, all 7 of them. When I finally got sit downs, they were friends with the activists who were in the classroom. They condoned everything that happened. One of our school board members, Kristen Draper, said, gender and sex are never binary, and we should be teaching kids this as young as 5. And, it was like she was also proud of what had happened with my little girl, that they weren't hearing that, this had harmed her, that we had been spiraled into confusion and depression and even suicidality. My daughter left us a suicide note 6 months after this meeting because we didn't know how to address what she was going through. And in ignoring it, she got worse and worse. And I actually took her to therapy and found out that there are some laws in the state of Colorado that make it impossible for a licensed counselor to deal with this. They have to affirm children who are confused about their gender. There's an actual bill. It was 1911-29, passed in 2019, that banned conversion therapy, that made it illegal to do anything but affirm gender confused youth. Can't question it. And so taking her to a therapist made her worse. And the school district didn't care. It's been insane to see them double down and take zero responsibility or accountability for what happened.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. Definitely a big story. And I think people, parents especially need to really be aware that the schools they're sending their kids to aren't the same that they went to even, 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's not the same kind of environment. It's a totally different place that seems so ideologically driven. And of course, there's this underlying ideology that they're just willing to give to kids and kind of pass it on as if I don't know. It's so strange. It does seem kind of surreal that this is happening here in Weld County Public Schools.
We're in Larimer County, but we're right on the line, and it's a very
Okay.
conservative little town that we moved to on purpose. We moved to Wellington. It's a horse town of 10,000 people that's got amazing churches and amazing conservative values, and it's where we thought we wanted to raise our family. And within a year of moving here, this happened to us. It's just it still is kind of unbelievable to me. But as I've dug into the issue, and since we've gone public and kind of become the face of this issue in the state of Colorado, I've had so many families reach out. It's happening all over the state, in conservative areas, in blue areas. It's happening in conservative states like Nebraska and Oklahoma and Texas. It just, our story, as shocking as it is no longer the exception. It's absolutely the rule. Everyone watching any interview I've ever done knows someone or knows someone who knows someone whose child is going through this kind of gender confusion. And it's usually a result of, for kids as young as mine, indoctrination in the public schools. They pander to these kids' kindness and compassion. And parents like me, they pander to my kindness and compassion. And, if you don't go along with it, you're a bigot, you're hateful, you're not supporting your child. And it's just, I understand now why so many people have been captured by it.
Wow. So the film's called Art Club, and it's found at artclubmovie.com. Definitely recommend everybody check it out. Artclubmovie.com. It's free to watch. Definitely an eye-opening experience. Very well made and very interesting. And I really liked how it kind of showed your family's personal story, but also showed the larger context of what's going on, as you said, nationally, and how this kind of ideology has just permeated so much of our society. Regarding the art club, so did they told your daughter that to tell you guys to tell her parents to tell you that it was an art club? I mean, there wasn't even an attempt to. They just told her flat out, getting back to that day when she first attended. They didn't say, "Hey, tell your parents you're going to this gender club after school." They said, "Hey, tell your parents you're going to this art club and keep it a secret from them." I mean, is that what happened?
So two things here. My daughter was sitting alone on the bleachers in the last class of her day, which was study hall with this art teacher. And the teacher approached her unsolicited on the bleachers and said, "Hey, we're having an art club after school. Do you want to come?" My daughter genuinely thought she was walking into an art club where she could make some friends. She had no friends. And it actually turns out the teacher had done a survey on her students and asked who the kids were connected to. And my daughter didn't circle anyone. And so the teacher knew she had zero connections with people her age, that she was just the perfect vulnerable target for this. And, she got there and learned it was GSA. And then she was told to lie to her parents. So when my husband picked her up from what we thought was art club and what she thought was art club, she kind of continued that. He said, "Hey, how was art club?" And she said, "It was good. It was fine, Dad. Everything's fine." And didn't lead on to what it actually was. But I could see on her face when she came in the door that something was off. It just, something did not sit right. So it's both. She was lied to. And then when she found out what it was, she was encouraged to continue that lie to us.
Wow, incredible. It's like a predator telling a kid come get free candy, right? I mean, come to this club, we're gonna do some art, we're gonna have some fun, and then they get there and they say, "Hey, have you ever heard about this sexual type stuff?" I mean, it's total predator behavior, and I guess the word for it is grooming, right?
Mhm. It's Predator 101. Come on in, and there was toys and stickers and bracelets and celebration and rainbows and sunshine. And then, shrouded in, "Don't tell your parents we talked about this." And she was just barely 12 years old. And again, COVID started when she was just turning 11. So she was truly just an innocent, naive, vulnerable little girl who was ripe for the picking, and they took advantage of her.
Wow. That was one of the things that shocked me watching the film was realizing that she only went to this club once. Just one time going to this after school event and then coming home and proclaiming that she's transgender as the flag waving the flag, delivering it to you kind of as an excited little kid saying, there's this new, I mean, if they told her she was, a teddy bear or something like that, she probably, would go along with it because it's this fun little club that they can play make believe and belong to something and have something they can bond with other people over. I mean, that was shocking to me, just the one instance of going to this gender club and all of a sudden, I could see other kids maybe just attending once and then before you know it, they're taking drugs or trying to go even further down this rabbit hole.
Well, and so one club meeting, but I learned after the fact, and shame on me as a parent for not opening every book and reading every assignment and getting in, forcing myself into the classroom and asking the right questions, because what we learned is that she had been primed for this in curriculum. So when she was 11 in that same middle school in 6th grade, she was assigned a book called George. And she brought it home and I didn't think anything of it. I mean, she was 11, it's called George, but come to find out a year later, the English teacher was still assigning that to 11-year-olds. And it's a book entirely about transgenderism. It talks about pornography, cutting your private parts off, playing with yourself in the bathtub, a little boy kissing other boys, wearing girls' underwear. It was entirely about transgenderism, and it was assigned reading. And then she also indicated that, it all started really the theme in 5th grade Eco Week, which is in the state of Colorado, kids take a week and they go out into the wilderness, and it's supposed to be this great ecological experience. And she said that's where, boys were sleeping in the girls' room, girls were sleeping in the boys' room. There was talk about transgenderism. And ever since that, there was lots of pronoun conversation. Teachers starting the class with what's your name? What's your preferred name? Do we tell your parents? And so we understand now that there had been subtle seeds planted in her head by this same school district for years before art club happened. And I don't know that it was a coincidence. I think all kids are subjected to this kind of theme that's peppered throughout the curriculum. And some kids are strong enough to know that, there's nothing wrong with who they are and that the transgender label doesn't fit. But our daughter was just so vulnerable at that moment that, all the seeds up until that moment led her to go, oh, well, that makes sense. Everyone else is talking about their pronouns, girls are sleeping in the boys' bunks. This is just a very normal thing. And it felt normal to her at that point.
Yeah, it's very insidious to, plant these seeds, prime the kids, give them this information, this literature, kind of put in their heads, kind of program them, and then, do these surveys, analyze who are the right targets, and then they can just pull them out, get them to go to these groups, and then kind of have their way with them almost. It's very insidious, and I think, people need to be aware that this is happening in your kid's school. It could happen anywhere. It's not just down in Cherry Creek.
Yeah, a great organization for looking into it actually is Parents Defending Education. They have what they call the indoctrination map. And so it's a tool for parents to report these kinds of things happening in their schools. And so that's the first place I tell parents to look, like go see what other people have reported in your district or in the surrounding districts to see what's happening. The other thing is public record requests. So much of what I have found is just digging through the curriculum, opening the books, reading the school website, and if needed, performing public record requests so that you can see every area of the curriculum. Because that, again, I guarantee it's in every single district in the state of Colorado in some way or another. Kids are being hit with this kind of gender ideology theme.
Wow. Well, and it seems to me too, the situation with young people today is this lack of identity. Kids and even adults don't know who they are. They don't have anything that defines them or ties them to the past. We've seen this loss of religious communities for a lot of people, loss of, this ethnic identity. It's not okay to be of European descent, for example, or different backgrounds. So, you ask somebody 50, 100 years ago who they are, and they'll tell you, based on their ancestry, their religion, all these other characteristics that kind of define who they are and their place in the world and kind of give it their meaning. But it seems like in this modern age that we have, a lot of kids don't have that. They're totally disconnected from anything other than what's right in front of them on their phone or in the schools or, something else. So I don't know. I was curious what you thought about that in terms of, kids looking for an identity and these people kind of preying upon that.
Yeah, well, in Art Club movie, we have Alex Newman, who's actually the journalist from Epic Times and Frank's Speech who first broke our story a few years ago. And he gives the best explanation of where did this come from and to what end, which is something I've struggled with. When this first happened, it's like, where did this come from? Where are we headed? What is going on? And he gives the best explanation that kids are being stripped of all their identities as an American. That's now become, people feel guilty to be Americans. I just saw that one school is removing Patriot Day because it's so polarizing and offensive. Like, so they're stripping kids of their identity in their country, their identity in religion. Christianity is now oppressive and evil, and they're shaming kids for their religious identity, their identity in their family, and gender ideology. If you can strip kids of the very fundamental essence of who they are, male and female, you can convince them to do and say and believe anything. It's like they're creating these little progressive Marxists who are ready to do anything that the agenda wants them to do. And I very much feel like gender ideology falls into that larger framework of, indoctrinating the next generation.
Wow, yeah, it's a multi-generational issue for sure, where we see this larger trend going on, as you said, with the loss of national identity. I mean, we're seeing it play out at the state capitol with the special session and some of the people replacing their legislators taking their American flags down and just people totally distancing themselves from the traditions and the cultural norms that have made our country what it is today. Everything we were provided with in terms of the wealth and freedoms we have. It seems like they're using every opportunity they can to kind of strip those things away. And unfortunately, it seems to be pretty prevalent and in service of this larger agenda, unfortunately.
Mm. Yeah, they're making kids feel guilty for these things, like they need to repent. And one way to do that is to proclaim victim oppressed status. There's a lot of people who will say CRT, critical race theory, is not happening in schools. It absolutely is. And it's a precursor to gender ideology. You've made these kids feel guilty for being white. You've made them feel guilty for having ancestors who owned slaves. You've made them feel guilty for being patriotic, for being, again, Christian. And in doing that, it's very easy to get yourself out of that feeling of being the oppressor by just claiming to be the oppressed. And one thing that I've seen with kids, I truly believe this transgender ideology is a contagion. My school district claims that 47%, according to the Healthy Kids Colorado survey, 47% of the students in Larimer County are LGBTQ and 30% in the district are LGB. So it very much is a social contagion. And one thing I've seen amongst kids is pansexual, bisexual, and non-binary. Because in proclaiming those things, you don't actually have to change anything about yourself. You can just claim that you're this label, wear it, be part of the oppressed club, and you no longer have to be the victimizer, the oppressor, the hater, the bigot. So you'll see an uptick in kids proclaiming particularly non-binary and pansexual.
Wow. Did you say 47%?
47%.
That
That's the
that is
thing.
unbelievable. So nearly half the kids in Larimer County are claiming to be anything other than just, standard, I guess cisgendered or whatever the word would be exactly. I mean, that's absolutely shocking. And it just shows how pervasive this has become and how it is a social contagion in as much as that, hey, you want to be cool, you want to fit in, you want to belong, then this is what you need to do.
Mhm. It's scary to watch, and it's scary to watch the adults in the room and the professionals, the union-backed professionals who run our school boards and the committees that influence what the school is doing, identifying with that statistic and perpetuating that statistic. Like, yep, what 1 out of 2 kids are LGBTQ. We better ramp up the programming, more mental health counselors, more GSAs, more activists in the classroom. Either they're, completely nefariously going along with it, or they genuinely believe that that statistic is valid. It's really concerning. I actually, at a small closed session with our superintendent here in the Poudre School District, I challenged him on the Healthy Kids Colorado survey. And I caution all parents to look at it and opt out of it. It is an awful survey. It clearly produces skewed data. And I called him out on that. I said, it's an opt-in program in the state. Why do we continue to give this survey to students? And he said, well, Erin, we need the data to support our programming, not the other way around. They'd already identified what programming they want to push, but this was the means to get the data to support it. And they're really upfront about that. It's alarming.
Wow. So they're using the Healthy Kids survey, and I'm sure others to kind of loaded questions, kind of get them in front of the kids, get them to respond in a way that's favorable to them to perpetuate these programs. Is that accurate?
Yep. 1,000,000%. I think they asked 4 different times if you're transgender, and there's something like 7 different options. So it's yes, no, maybe, I don't know what that is, prefer not to say. And they're able to lump those answers into the category that suits their narrative and the kind of programming that they want to push. So it's incredibly dangerous. And that survey talks about, it's given to kids as young as 5th grade, sexual activity. Do your parents have guns in the home? Drug use. I mean, it's a really invasive, inappropriate survey for some of the age range, well, for all the age ranges that it's administered to.
Oh. Yeah, it's this bigger trend of the state trying to separate kids from their parents from these, I'd call them political authoritarians, these people who want to have this state managed society just to totally erase that bond between parents and kids, find those pressure points or points where they can get the kids away and kind of get them to attach to something else and follow along with what the teachers, the bureaucrats, or these activists want them to do.
There's that. And I say all the time, I studied elementary education as my undergrad. And I say it in the film, I was indoctrinated myself. I was an L-Ed major in 2005 at a public university. And, I had mandatory humanities class. everything was, about race and sexuality. And I understand now that I had been indoctrinated into going along with it. And I'm very pro teacher. I'm pro education. I understand that I don't think most teachers are meaning to do evil. I don't think most of them have nefarious agendas. I think the leadership does, the unions do, and the school boards do. But the teachers themselves, most of them, as I said, have had their kindness and compassion pandered to. They're told that this is the right thing to do. This is what you're supposed to teach. These are the safe spaces you're supposed to provide these kids. And in not doing so would be discriminatory and hateful towards the children. And I think most of them are just doing what they think is expected of them, including
Well,
the art teacher at my daughter's school.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I agree with you that a lot of these teachers are well-meaning and they're trying to do what's best for the kids. Probably most of them are teachers because they see themselves as somebody who can help the kids, who can help the next generation, provide this educational experience. They probably had great teachers themselves and kind of want to give back. So, that was my experience going to public schools here in Jefferson County. I had great teachers and I was lucky, but I was one of the things that really shocks me about this whole LGBTQ movement in public schools now is, I'm a product of the public schools
Mhm.
here in Colorado, and there was none of this at least that I was aware of. Maybe there was, but when I was, going to kindergarten, first grade, second grade, they never talked to us about this kind of thing. I mean, there was maybe a passing reference to something like that, but it wasn't so I don't know, it wasn't so in your face or it wasn't really pushed on the kids. And it's so interesting because it's clearly not an organic situation, right? It's not an organic issue. It's not like all of a sudden this has just sprung up. The kids are really this way. It's pretty clear that once it started getting introduced, this whole ideology gets introduced in these schools at this young age. That's when the kids start changing, and that's when we're starting to get the 47% and all these different people proclaiming to be this way. I mean, it seems so clear to me that it's a product, it's a product of this indoctrination at this public school level.
I think the frog has been in the pot boiling for decades. As I've thrown myself into research for years, I look back at Karl Marx and Scott Dewey, and our education system has been hijacked for decades. But I think just since 2015, from what I've been reading, is when they just turned the heat all the way up on the pot, and COVID happened, and Black Lives Matter movement happened, and I think some people started to wake up and other people started to just amplify. I mean, just, put the gas onto these agendas and do them way more openly than they were in the past. They've definitely turned the heat all the way up on these agendas, and they're really showing their cards.
Well, I thought that was interesting too. You mentioned in the film that, once you started exposing this, started using your voice, starting getting loud about what was happening in the schools, it seemed like some of these people only became more bold. These, whether they're school board members or these activists or these people who are proud of what was happening, just were emboldened by your outrage. I was kind of shocked at that. I expected, things maybe how they used to be, where something like this gets exposed and that side pulls back a little bit and says, okay, maybe we went too far, but it doesn't seem like that's happening.
Nope, they doubled down. They hired more diversity, equity, inclusion staff, including an LGBTQ coordinator who makes double what a teacher makes annually. They ramped up more mental health counseling, more GSAs. They made them all school sponsored so adults could fully participate without parent knowledge. It's like it was a fork in the road and they had two options: take accountability for what had happened or full speed ahead with the agenda that this parent had happened to interrupt. And it became clear through FOIA emails that I found that this was something they'd been doing for a long time. They referred to parents who find out as barriers that they've removed at other schools. They talked about their right to lie under the Equal Access Act, which isn't relevant at all in this situation. It's like they knew what to do. They're like, okay, here's the parent we've been waiting for. Let's shut her up and double down on what we're doing. And that's exactly what they did. They've just vilified me for coming forward. And you'll notice they've never denied what happened. They've actually confirmed quite a bit of what happened with my daughter and with that club. They've never denied it, but they've just doubled down on the agenda. And it's, I think it has to get worse before it gets better. I think a lot of parents are going to have to go through something similar before they wake up to what's happening, unfortunately. And with their hand on the throttle, that's going to happen to a lot of parents more quickly than people realize.
Oh yeah, it sounds like they had a playbook. They kind of knew what to do. Here comes a barrier of a concerned parent.
Yeah.
Follow, they had all the steps in place of how to deal with you and how to try and marginalize you and continue with their agenda.
Yep, and it didn't work for the record. And we filed a federal lawsuit in May of this year. So exactly 2 years after the incident, we filed and along with another family whose daughter had been attending that club. She didn't attend the week my daughter did, but she attended the weeks after. So she wasn't there with the activist, but this little girl followed the rule and she didn't go home and tell her family. And about 6 months after she had started these meetings, she attempted suicide by drinking bleach. And the family didn't understand where all this confusion had come from. And she tried all the labels. She was asexual, pansexual, bisexual, transgender. Nothing was fitting. She was trying all the fun labels with the kids in the club and it wasn't fitting. And it just tanked her mental health. And it wasn't until we went public that the family learned, started to connect dots and ask the right questions and learned that she had been going to this club. So they pulled her out of the school and she's luckily doing a lot better now, as is my daughter. But in the lawsuit, so the school district's lawyers, they filed a motion to dismiss the case. And it's basically predicated on the fact that our daughters are unequivocally trans and therefore nothing they did is wrong. They're just there to help the kids. But we, the parents, are abusive and we have caused their mental health decline. They even said in the documents that they should throw out the case because we're white cisgenders and because parents have no right to education unfettered by reasonable government intervention. Those are actual quotes from the motion to dismiss by their lawyers. So that's clearly their stance. They're not backing down. They're like, no, I know you are, but what am I? No, we didn't do that. You did this to your own children by not accepting their identity. And it's just, it's sick to watch this mindset play out.
Yeah, that's an incredible and really incredible use of language that they have in that statement there to dismiss the case. I mean, it sounds something that you could hear in the Soviet Union or Communist China or something like from a fictional novel where, they have total control over your kids and they know exactly how your kids should identify or how they actually are better than you, the parent. I mean, it is very frightening for sure.
Yeah.
I think one of the really compelling things that you brought up in the film, and I think you mentioned it tonight also, but the fact that your daughter was told that she could escape the pain and awkwardness of puberty, and they use that kind of as a tool to hook her in. And like you said, everybody goes through those kind of challenging years in which there's some struggles, there's some questions, there's changes. And
Yeah.
I just thought that was really interesting to see that as an avenue that they're using to target kids with, to really convince them, hey, maybe you don't have to go through puberty if you take these drugs.
Mhm.
I mean, it's just interrupting the natural life cycle and really disrupting their development.
Well, it's scary to think they talked about them behind our back without our knowledge. And again, in Colorado, there was another law passed in 2019, 1120, which lowered the age of mental health consent to 12. And so in our case, we took her to therapists that made her worse. Then she became suicidal as a result of, the spiral of confusion and depression. So we took her to her pediatrician. That makes sense. She's 12. We trust the pediatrician. And because of this law, we have to leave the room for the mental health assessment. And when we come back, Zoloft has already been, a prescription is already on the table. And it wasn't our decision as to whether or not our daughter would take those psychotropic drugs. It was her decision at the age of 12. And then our arm was twisted in that doctor's office. It was, we were reluctant to have her take them. And it was basically, do you want her to kill herself? Or do you want her to take these drugs? Do you want her to be a transgender boy or do you want her to kill herself? And this is the lie that parents are sold. They are bullied into going along with the medicalization. I feel so much for parents whose kids are going through this, whose kids are asking for medicalization. Like Chloe Cole comes to mind. She has so much empathy for her parents um, because she felt like they were strong armed and bullied into going along with the medicalization. And we live in a state where the laws facilitate that.
Wow. Well, let's get into some of those laws. So you said that as a 12-year-old in Colorado, so as far as you know, a 12-year-old can basically decide to get on some sort of prescription drugs. Does that include puberty blockers or hormone replacement therapy or anything like that?
I assume so. Those weren't prescribed to my daughter, so I can't speak from personal experience. But if, a serious psychotropic drug like Zoloft, and then she was switched to Prozac, can be prescribed without parent knowledge or consent, I have to assume that yes, puberty blockers fall into that category. And, we have state programs like iMatter and Colorado Crisis Services, which are pushed into our public schools. Actually, my daughter and I testified against House Bill 1003 last year, which passed, which cemented the iMatter program. It's now going to mandate mental health surveys for all 6th through 12th graders. And because of that law, where 12-year-olds make their own decisions, if a parent opts their child out, 12 and older, the child can just opt themselves back in. And the mental health survey, I took the iMatter survey. I was deemed high risk. I'm not. And so what that tells me is that lots of kids are going to be deemed high risk and referred to counselors behind their parents' back, and parents are not going to know about it. The results from this survey go to the school, not to the parents. And the school then decides whether or not to refer this child to the iMatter counselor program. So after I took the survey, I clicked, what counselors are available to me. And they were all LGBTQ affirming. Some of them were sex work and kink positive. And this is the state's network of mental health counselors for children that our kids are now going to be funneled to through the schools without parent knowledge or consent. And yes, they can prescribe 12 and older.
Right now in Colorado, a 12-year-old who's confused about things can go in, get some antidepressant prescription drug without parental consent, can go have these secret meetings with somebody who's, going to convince them how great prostitution is. And then the sky's the limit from there, I guess. Jeez.
It's really scary, and it sucks because it's under the guise of mental health. And yes, there is a mental health crisis for our kids. Schools will never admit that masking them and distancing them and kicking them out of their schools and closing their families' businesses contributed to it. The reality is that COVID lockdowns had a lot to do with the mental health crisis. Kids do need mental health support, but parent and family involvement is absolutely pivotal to successful mental health treatment. And there's a brave psychologist who goes through that in our art club documentary, Dr. Jennifer Bowens, who talks about how important family involvement is, and to not include them goes against everything that clinicians learn in their schooling. And it's scary to think how the state is usurping parental rights and really acting like they know what's best for our kids and just cutting us out.
Wow. Yeah, it's shocking. It's frightening. I mean, it really is horrific. It's something that I think, unfortunately, like you said, for some parents out there, they'll think they're going to be in denial, right? I mean, I'm sure there's people out there, hopefully maybe watching this or hearing about your movie, say, "Oh, that'll never happen to my kid. That'll never, that couldn't happen in my community. That can't happen in my school. I went to that school when I was young." But the reality is, I mean, there could be serious harm caused to these children if parents aren't paying attention. I mean, just by sending them to these public schools, of course, on top of all the bullying and violence and drug use that's already pretty endemic in most of most of Colorado schools, unfortunately. Now there's this where you have an adult predator class targeting children for everything we've been talking about. I mean, it is surreal just even talking about it. I almost have to laugh just because it just seems so absurd that this is so
Utopian.
prevalent. So yeah.
Well,
um
my mission is to educate as many parents as possible and to wake up those people who think it can't happen to them. Again, I was progressive leaning and not very religious prior to this happening to my family. And if someone asks me my biggest hurdle in achieving that mission, it's willful ignorance and apathy. It's the parents who say, la, 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 this doesn't affect me. It's not happening. Pulling my kids out of public school is inconvenient. Yes, it is inconvenient. It's going to require sacrifice to not just put your kids on the public school bus and get them back 8 hours later, but you either sacrifice now or you're sacrificing your kids to indoctrination in this kind of ideology. And again, sometimes it's so subtle, the seeds that are planted, that you won't understand that it's happened to your kid until it's too late. So I'm a huge advocate again for pulling out of traditional public schools. And we're lucky in Colorado, we have a lot of options. Not many states are as lucky as us to have a lot of great classical core knowledge charter schools around the state. We've got great private school options. We've got homeschool co-ops. Check.org, Colorado Home or Christian Home Educators of Colorado, was actually founded by my documentary filmmaker, Kevin Lundberg. So we've got great resources for alternatives. We just have to take advantage of them.
Definitely, yeah. Most important thing a parent could do is really get their kids away from government schools. It's not taking them any place good. There's so many better options out there. And then the technology that's out there for online tutoring and so many other educational resources, it's definitely difficult and inconvenient. It's probably more accessible than ever, though.
Absolutely. Well, as a family, we went down to one car and I took a night job at the liquor store in Wellington to pay for private Christian school for my daughter because it meant that much to us. And I don't regret 1 second of that. I mean, I would give my left arm and drive to Colorado Springs every day to put them in a good educational environment because pulling my kids out of public school has made such a difference in all of our lives. So I've got my son in a classical charter, my daughter in a private Christian, and they're just different kids now. Our family dynamic is different, academically, socially. They're just better all around for not being in the public school. I tell parents all the time, yes, this is a polarizing issue, this gender ideology, but start at a really easy place we all agree upon. Less than 30% of kids in the state of Colorado can read and do math at grade level. That alone should be a reason not to put your kids in the public system. Start there.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a very easy sell for sure. I can't help but think too that, this mental health crisis is almost like they're creating mental health issues with these schools. I can't imagine, being a young kid, being told all of these things, being confused. I mean, given all this confusing information and being presented with all these ideas, I'm sure it's causing a lot of anxiety, a lot of social pressure, a lot of mental health issues in kids. So it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy where they create these mental health issues, then they provide the solution and hey, just give us more money, give us more staff, give us more ability to address these problems that we're creating.
Yep. I call that out in art club documentary as well. It just feels like a conveyor belt. And there's so many working parts. There's the education system, the mental health system, the healthcare system, the foster system, the legislature who's passing these laws. So I found out the activist who was in the classroom with my daughter is a registered foster parent. And I've received public records of her proudly calling CPS on over 2 dozen unaffirming families. So and they did that with us. She threatened to call CPS and do a well child check on my family for not immediately affirming what my daughter was going through. And there's a local pastor here in the area who the Coloradan wrote an article about how he adopts these queer kids and gets them access to gender affirming care without asking any questions. They praised him for this. He said, we need more queer families like me in the system who will help these kids get access to medical care. And it's, again, they're very brazen about the issue, but there's just so many components. And they put my daughter on the beginning of the conveyor belt. And thank God we pulled her off before it got too far. But there are so many broken families just in the state of Colorado whose kids were pushed down that path. And now they're estranged from their families. They're taking hormones, they're getting surgeries. They're in dark clouds of depression. I see that so often. You're not going to find a transgender child who isn't depressed. It just causes this dark cloud because you're trying to change your sex and you can't change your sex. It's not possible. And so it spirals these kids into depression. And it's really hard to talk to so many families around the state who are not as lucky as we are to have removed our
Yeah.
daughter on.
Well, and I think a lot of that goes towards, the relationship you describe in the film, having this open relationship with your kids where they have the ability to talk to you. So she was comfortable bringing this up to you pretty much immediately rather than letting it kind of fester and hide for months. So,
Yeah.
she comes home from this art club, tells and your husband, she's transgender now, waves a little flag around. You guys, of course, kind of go through this process of understanding what exactly is going on. Uh, at some point though, you decided you're not going to send her back to this school. You're going to take a stand. You're going to kind of confront, not necessarily confront, but you're going to communicate with the school about what's going on. So what was that like? You have this issue. What did you do? You reached out to the school staff, or what was your next step at that point?
Yeah, I mean, we were again really shocked and caught off guard, but we did make the decision. She never went back to school the next day. And that really was my husband's decision. Like, no way, I'm sending her back in there. He put his foot down, like, we're not sending her back to that school. But we thought maybe we were misunderstanding. Maybe it's an isolated incident. Maybe we need some holes filled in. But we talked to the principal, school board, superintendent, and just everyone doubled down on what had happened. And it was shocking that no one was willing to hear that we're saying we're hurting. Our child is hurting. We're hurting. No accountability. Still no transparency. They've hidden, so many things from us and from other parents. It just, we wanted to believe that they wanted to work with us, and they successfully gaslighted us for a while by feeding some lies about the situation. But then we continued to have parents reach out with similar stories, or completely different situations where the school had not been transparent or had pushed things on their kids. And we realized we couldn't be silent, that we had to use our story for good. And I don't know that we'll save the education system in Colorado. It's, watching this last school board election was really discouraging, that, people got their flyers in the mail from the union and they just voted the names that they got on the flyer in the mail, that people aren't paying attention. But, my mission is to educate as many parents as possible so that they can make informed decisions for their own kids. We're not going to save every kid. We're not going to flip the education system overnight. It's going to take time. But in the meantime, I hope that parents will heed my warning and protect their own kids.
Yes, definitely. Hope they can gain something from this, learn what's going on in their schools, be a little bit more aware and get involved. Like I think what you said earlier about being kind of apolitical or hands off or not really paying attention to schools is so common out there. People, it's a convenient way for parents to let their kids out of their mind, out of sight for 8 hours a day. And it's so unfortunate that that's become a place where people are taking advantage of that situation
Yeah.
where the parents are paying attention and using it to fulfill this other agenda, unfortunately. So
Yeah.
you reached out to the school, told them, you're not going back. So nobody at the school district, nobody in the school system was helpful or encouraging and or saw a problem with what was going on.
No. Not at all. And I've run into some teachers who are really scared, and some nurses who have been watching these things happen behind closed doors, but pretty much all of them are, staying anonymous. A few have left the district. There's a brave nurse who contributed to an Epic Times piece I did, and she confirmed everything that I've brought to light. But no, no one at the administration level has ever apologized. They've never changed any of the things that they've done. They continue to call me a hater, a destroyer, a liar publicly. We spoke at a school board meeting, my husband and I, where there was riotous protesters from Antifa outside. That's what happens now when I go to school board meetings. And after we spoke, one of the school board members said, it really pisses me off that these parents have to get up here and try to tear down our school district. It's just, they cannot take any accountability.
Wow. Wow, that is incredible. And I mean, in a way, I guess a lot of parents are probably afraid also of child protective services, that just the threat that they would call some state agent to come in and do a welfare check and see if that what's going on and try and get, I mean, really this malicious intent to try and take your kids away from you if you're not going to go along with this idea.
It's terrifying. And I think in the state of Colorado, if CPS had shown up, so the principal did a well child check. He insisted on coming to our home to discuss what had happened. Then we found the email showing that that was a well child check in lieu of CPS. So we're fortunate CPS did not show up at our home. But I think if they had, and I let them in, I now understand you don't have to let them in without a warrant. But if we had let them in, and my child had said, my mom's not affirming my transgender identity, I think they would have taken her from the home. And you could read stories about this all over the country. There's Abigail Martinez in California. They did this with her daughter, and her daughter ended up killing herself. There's Sage in Virginia, who got sex trafficked all over the country when they removed the daughter from the home for the grandma who was acting as mom not affirming. And it's just scary to think there are real horror stories where the kids were removed for this reason. And there are laws trying to be pushed in Colorado. So I caution Coloradans to pay attention. I testified 3 weeks ago at the Youth Advisory Council. They pushed through a bill that is going to now label misgendering as discrimination. And they put that, charter schools are now defined under this law. They're expanding that forced speech. And I've heard from legislators, they're also going to push a bill like California AB 665, where for parents, misgendering or not affirming your child's gender confusion will be defined as abuse. So there will be a solid law that enables them to remove your child if you don't go along with the gender confusion. And in my case, it goes to show that going along with it would have killed her. She firmly believes if we had affirmed her, the confusion would have got so bad that she doesn't think she'd be alive today. So we're really lucky we had the ability to parent our kid as we saw fit and get her through the confusion and the darkness and save her life. But they're trying to pass laws that will prevent parents from being able to do that. And it's terrifying.
Wow. I mean, it's a real wake-up call, and I think that's a hopeful message I have is that, there's people out there waking up, parents getting involved, and we just need a little bit better organization, a little bit more awareness, I think, and some marketing about what's going on. At Free State Colorado, we have a really strong legislative program, so we'll be tracking a lot of that next year, trying to keep people informed about these bills as they're being heard so people can testify in committee. And 2024 is going to be a big election year. So, if there's any of these legislators who are in some marginal districts where there's a chance they could lose, be really paying attention to those to see if maybe they vote the wrong way on some of these bills, and hopefully the voters can hold it against them come November.
And keep your eyes peeled because I'm bringing some citizens ballot initiatives in 2024. So I'm bringing at least three, potentially four initiatives on the transgender and parental rights issue, recognizing parental rights has been hijacked, that those words have been hijacked by the other side. So you may not see them branded as parental rights, but we aim to strengthen parents' rights in the state of Colorado and protect kids from gender mutilation and from boys and girls spaces and from, being forced to keep secrets from their parents. So if our legislature, which is just doing off the rails nonsensical stuff, is not going to protect those rights, and we're going to take it to the people, because people overwhelmingly agree that parents should have a right to be involved in their kids' education and healthcare, and that, gender affirming care for children is mutilation, it's not care. So we're taking it to the
Wow.
people.
No, that's amazing. And I'm really excited to hear that, Aaron. I hope you keep us updated about that. I'm really excited. And, that's a really good, optimistic, hopeful way to end this conversation is to know there's other options out there, this direct democracy angle, as well as, local activism. I think at the local level, not every school board is on board with defending parental rights, but some of them are. And the more of us that get involved, the better off we can be. So, Erin, thank you so much for not just this interview, but for everything you've done, for getting out there, getting involved, for, rising to the challenge, this challenge that has faced your family, and deciding to, become a warrior, become somebody who's going to be outspoken and stand up to, like you said, I mean, you're not going to save every kid, but you could save, even if you save one kid out there from going through this or committing suicide or losing their parents or something along those lines. I mean, it's such a powerful thing to do. So thank you for everything you do.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Well, thank you and take care. We'll talk to you again later.